All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another Digital Metaphysics discussion episode. This is the second discussion episode we're doing. We are with Milo again. Hi, Milo. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We had a good first discussion episode. You can find that one on the channel if you haven't seen that one yet. And then we also linked Milo's channel there because Milo talks about very similar things also, and you can get his angle and his approach to it as well. If you go and check it out, if you enjoy kind of our discussion here, you may enjoy checking out his channel as well. As you see up on the screen, we have these are some things that Milo, when he watched some of the digital metaphysics content, these are some of the key things that came up that he wanted to discuss. So he has some like general questions here that we're going to discuss. And then there's also some episode specific questions that we'll discuss. And some of the episode specific questions are ordered by the series, like in terms of episodes 1, 2, 3, 4. But then there's also a little bit of jumping that we do. So you'll notice that as well. But it should give us a good amount of free form ability to navigate this, as well as for you to navigate the playlist at however you want as well. You know, there is a certain reason why it's ordered that way, but at the same time, the most recent content is always going to have the most kind of recent, in-depth transmissions, if you will, something along those lines. So, yeah, so let's go ahead and jump into it. We also have another interesting discussion that's lined up that we're distilling some content for that. You know, it has some things that we've covered in the content on the channel and other things that we haven't yet. It's just been like kind of like a free flow back and forth that we took notes on in one time in a separate conversation that we're going to do as another future discussion episode, which really looking forward to that one too. Mm-hmm. It has a lot of interesting things that I think, you know, you and I were like, yeah, we were playing tennis on back and forth and we were like, wait, there actually hasn't been a lot of like discussion on these exact subjects before. So
I have to be honest that I don't even remember what it was, because like you've made the notes, I haven't seen them since, but the what's left with me is that I just remember the excitement. They're like, oh hell yeah, like this is definitely
yeah. There was like some stuff in there about like relationships. There was a lot of interesting stuff in there. Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing that episode. So let's jump in. So we have the start of the general questions. It starts with this, again, a very general question about, you know, how are traditional spiritual concepts like higher self, soul, or collective consciousness, past lives, how does it translate and integrate into this digital metaphysics model? All right. So again, a lot of these things, by the way, I viewed this once when you sent this to me, and then I viewed it again like right before this call, right? Mm-hmm. And it's very much, I have no planned answers whatsoever for all of this. So it's very much, free flowing, totally free flowing.
Nice. Awesome. Just can I just say something, like another householding item just before you jump into it?
Yes, please.
For the sake of our viewers watching this as a replay, and since that document is there, maybe if you keep highlighted the question that we're on currently, then people might be able to, you know, find.
That's right.
All for you, dear viewers.
Yeah, beautifully good housekeeping there. All right, so we have it highlighted now as we go. Yes. It's definitely something I've done in the streams with the notes up before, so good point out there.
Nice.
So, you know, right before we started streaming, I mentioned to you how important it is to just remember what the root or the anchor models are, and to just keep yourself at those root and anchor models, because essentially what can happen is, instead of you or, you know, the viewer or whoever feeling the direct experience of infinite consciousness now. Instead of that, what we have is we have all these conceptual elaborations that we get to. And then we have these arguments about what the nature of the higher self is, or what the nature of the soul is, or what the nature of the collective consciousness is, or past lives, or whatever. And we go off into these 10,000 things, and then we just start elaborating about this 10,000 things and all this kind of stuff. But there's no clear, direct experience of the thing that one actually is in that moment, right? So that's ultimately the answer to the vast majority of conceptualization about what one is to just stop elaborating about what one is and just instead feel in the moment your own true infinity, right? And when you truly feel that, you realize that, okay, well, I am everyone at the same time as that infinity right now, right? I'm absent of my name because I am the totality, right? And then that kind of kills time. It kills higher self, soul, collective, conscious, past lives. It kills these things because you're basically stuck with just you as the infinite, as everyone now, right? And that's where I always like to take the conversation back to over and over again. Yeah. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, so what I hear is that you're pointing to that pitfall of over intellectualizing things and playing around with concepts rather than actual reality.
Yeah.
I can see that, I think we're both kind of brainy. And it's fun to dissect those things, but for sure on my path, I realized that that's such a pitfall, right? That at some point you just enjoy talking and listening and talking some more and listening some more rather than actually dipping your toes in the in the vast.
Yeah.
So totally, I get that, and maybe that this is an interesting discussion point in itself because like it can almost become reduced to let's not talk at all. Let's just sit here in silent meditation.
Now let me address that, right? Because that's typically the other imbalanced side of it, right? So you could say there's these two balances that are really originating from the same place. One of them is hyper over conceptualization, and the other one is hyper over stillness, emptiness, no thingness, don't want to talk ever, don't want to listen ever, doesn't matter, who cares, right? So what you want instead is you want to use concepts and conversations very strategically and precisely and surgically to create the transformations in consciousness that one is coming to you seeking, right? So yeah. Because when one comes to you and they're like, yo, dude, I fucked up. Like, I really need to heal this shit. And like, I need your help with healing this shit. I don't know how to approach my significant other or whoever it is. And I need to heal this shit. And there you are just being like, right. And it's just like, dude, what they need in that moment is they need your sharp surgical tool for them to repent, for them to heal their transgression, right? They need you to hold their feet to the fire, right? To create that inner alchemy for the expansion of the contraction, right? So that's the balanced answer to that.
Yeah, well, what's coming up is I'm tracking you where you're going with this, and just to like, maybe even this sentence is like surgical, hopefully, just to broaden the view that sometimes just meeting somebody with literally this is precisely the medicine, it's precisely the surgical cut that they need.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. A lot of the time that is true, and it is very deeply helpful. And then a lot of the time it also misses the mark because it's not generating the transformation. Like it's literally like if somebody says, hey man, like my car, the dashboard of my car is currently showing a light for checking a mechanical part inside of it, right? and they're saying, hey, like, you're the mechanic, like, you're the surgeon, like, can you help me with the mechanical part in my car, right? That's essentially what's being asked of you. And so the answer of it doesn't really sometimes address the mechanical, right? So there's that kind of framing of it too that I think can help.
Yeah, maybe it can be put in a different way altogether. That essentially, I like to. I've noticed this, as I've been encountering teachers on my path. I've noticed quite early on that what distinguishes a great teacher from a good teacher is actually the ability. It's not how much they grok, right? Because ultimately, most teachers, hopefully, share a very similar depth of understanding. So that's not what a rubber meets the road. It's more in being able to meet the student, quote unquote, right? Or whoever is asking the question. And so, for instance, I've observed this in, I've seen Rupert Spira live, right? And watched plenty of his videos online. And I found it so interesting how he can receive the same question and he will give a different answer based on who's actually asking, right? It's like that intuition. It's almost like an art form to meet rather than to just give a standard answer. It's like what is really being asked for here in the space. And sometimes that evokes just like a deep sense of presence, right? Like if I'm with a client, or it evokes meeting them, maybe they're more in their head and that's where they need to be met at, right? Like conceptually. Yeah, so I'm curious where, how we're going to bring this back to that first question, and how can we walk that?
Briefly, just mastery has to do with the ability to gauge where the consciousness is at and then provide the consciousness with the very decryption key that it's looking for its own healing and awakening, right? That's how I speak it. That's how I phrase it, right? So,
Nice.
So if there's resonance with these phrasings, then that means that there's just resonance with the code, right? The way that it's being talked about. Whereas one of the main reasons why there's just your own mastery so important rather than latching on to the way that certain teachers teach is because your own form of mastery is going to include your own unique way of communicating truth and transmitting truth, right? So you're not really going to find other teachers that can talk about physics and cosmology at the same time as you talk about consciousness and spirituality and healing and transformation and AI and technology and decryption of encryptions, right? You need to be yourself. Being yourself is inevitably going to be the most fulfilling, and it's also going to be the thing that kind of gravitates those around you that resonate with how you're framing things, and then they'll enhance you, you'll enhance them, and you'll co-create even greater and mutated versions of it, So it's always about gauging where the consciousness is at and then serving it with its most powerful catalyst that it needs in that moment, its decryption key. But how it links back to this here is that, like I said, the more that you just feel infinite consciousness inside yourself, the more you dissolve these things, these elaborations. That's how I describe it. If you want a brief elaboration about it, the brief elaboration about it would be that there is only infinite consciousness as everyone right now. And that one way to view why is this experience this way right now, right? Why is this experience this way right now? Well, it's because what previously happened generated this experience, right? What this experience is doing is it's generating your next lucid dream of experience, right? That's one way to look at it. It's like you have a simultaneous feeding of generating or creating the current dream experience that you're having, while it's also feeding into the creative algorithm of what is coming next from what you're currently experiencing, right?
So
Let me give you
yeah,
the visual of it quick. It's like the
yeah,
information. It's like the information is both inflating an existing, like you poke your head out of a black hole, and it's inflating the current cosmic picture of what you are and what you're experiencing. But at the same time, the information is going through the branch of the tree. It's going through that branch of the tree to another part, another leaf, and it's like slowly inflating that next leaf on the tree, you could say something like that. And that's
it kind
quote.
of feeds into itself, that sort of thing
Yes,
recursively.
yes, yes, yes.
So that evokes like another question, and I hope that's okay that we
Yeah,
jump a bit, right? It's free flow here.
yeah.
So it immediately makes me wonder about your take under this digital metaphysics model of cause and effect.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's both absolutely free right now of all everything cause and effect related. Right now it's totally free. And at the same time it's bounded to what is consciously being generated through cause and effect. Meaning, like right now, if the cause comes up of go to the bathroom, the effect will be go to the bathroom. Right? That's just how it works. That's the physics of creation. There's just no way to unbind that. Right? That's just how the paintbrush itself works. But at the same time, it's totally free in the sense that right now, which, the very tiniest bit on the probability curve is something like I just pick up and move to Thailand or something, right? That tiniest little probability is total freedom for that to emerge, right? That's what I'm also saying at the same time, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're also causally binded in a way by how much you've healed. Meaning, if you've only healed a certain amount of your contractions, of your traumas, of your pains, you're going to be binded or bound to the causal effects of that. Meaning, you're going to be playing out those scripts or programs around, well, I still hate my parent, or I hate my sibling, or I hate my spouse for this thing that happened, or I hate my friend for that thing that happened, right? So meaning if you haven't healed those karmas, your projection will include othering, and it will include war or an enemy, right? So that's the effect of the causal system not being healed. That's another way to give that piece to it.
And what's your take on the topic of perceptual filters? That there's that idea. Essentially, the idea is that there is time, right? That's an idea. That your mind glues together all of those still frames essentially into a sense of time, of a past, of a future, whereas there's only really now, right? So you see where I'm going with this? Like, how does that tie into the cause effect when in reality there's just the arising now?
Exactly. Correct. Yeah. That's always what it is. Right? And then what we just described was, okay, if this is absolutely free right now for anything to happen, right? Including going to Thailand or healing some sort of trauma and living more freely, whatever, that at the same time that whatever was, quote, happening that led to this is also influencing based on how contracted that consciousness is or how expanded it is, right? It has to be both, meaning you can't just say that it's going to be one or the other. It's always going to be both in that way. It's both absolutely free, and it's also script, the programming that's running deep down there at the bootloader. That programming is always going to be influencing what's being manifested, what's being created. And until there's a deconstruction of certain scripts or programs that are running out there, the absolute freedom that is felt will be less because there was,
Gotcha. And like what I saw now when I was hearing you speak was that the arising of the effect actually coincides because there's only really now, right? So in the moment, in the now, capital N now, the effect happens with the idea of cause, right? So it's not necessarily that there was a minute ago, a day ago, a week ago, where the cause lives, and now it blossoms into this, that the seed was planted. Actually, this blossoms, and the idea of a seed that grew into whatever tree we're looking at,
Yeah.
also happening here now.
Right. And and again, this is always the best, instead of it being past, now, future, right? Instead, put that here, right, inside yourself. That's just another way to put it, right? Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So it removes the linear aspect of the illusion of time, and instead it puts it into a tree that consciousness is, that it's just seeded and watered the soil a certain way, and maybe there wasn't that nourishing of the soil, quote, 20 years ago or whatever the trauma is, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Nice. We're really hitting something deep here. I'm happy this unfolded in this direction, because like what you said just now, that's cool, right? That essentially present, obviously, but also future and past are arising now in that totality, present moment. So that there never was a past, there never is a future. There's just the ideas of past and future that are always arising here now, which brings us into that like 0 point singularity. There is nowhere outside of it. There, the idea of space-time within it is an illusion that's being experienced, but essentially it's just this.
Yes.
Nice. And I guess this can lend itself as an analogy to also the otherness that you touched on, right? That the same way that we are under the spell of that illusion of a past and present that are sort of here, and that's similarly with space, that I'm over here, you're over there, all of this actually collapses into that singularity. And in that singularity, there is just unity consciousness. No separation, no space, no time, just this.
Yes.
That was a nice riff, man. I feel that.
Yeah, that was a good one. I tried making a little bit of a note of it because it was different enough, rather than a linear time of past, present, and future. Feel the seed and the tree inside you now generating what you're experiencing, right? And then reprogram, recode from there. That's one way to say, what you're working with is ultimately yourself. That's the only thing you're ever working with, right? So if you see yourself as a programmer of your hallucination, of your lucid dream, then all that you're working with is the information at the fundament of consciousness, right? So meaning whatever that information is, if you're going to investigate that, right, that's that little seed, that little tree that's blooming up into your experience right now. If you recode that, right, meaning like instead of seeing the other as enemy, right, that kind of thing, see other as capital S self, as you. And then in that moment, that reframing, right, that's why we always talk about it as reframing too, is the same thing as reprogramming and recoding, is that you're reframing your experience in a way where you stop dreaming separation, and you start living from non-separation, which then beautifully, clearly allows you to heal that what's at the fundament, which then changes the fruit that you're experiencing. Right? Yeah.
Beautiful, man. Yeah. It's just like almost becomes so simple, right? And in that simplicity, what I'm hearing is that essentially you're talking about beliefs, right? Like I'm not sure that's that's where we can bring it back to metaphysics. Like what do you see it as a a code or algorithm, or like how do beliefs fit into this? Because you probably see where I'm going with this already, right? That everything you touched on already, they're simply beliefs, right? There's a belief in time, there's a belief in space, there's a belief in separation, there's a belief.
Yeah.
And it's like it's almost like the whole journey of awakening becomes about shedding beliefs that are not
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. Yeah. Precisely. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's like you're picking up or contracting around those beliefs or those programs or those codes, and then you're shedding or you're alchemizing, you're transmuting them into the clear nature of just the bootloader itself.
Mm.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Is that good? Is
So
that good to move to the next subject? Yeah. What
yeah,
takes you
I
to?
felt like that feels natural, moving
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
to AI. So the question is short, but essentially, I'm not sure if this is something that can be felt. I'm curious about this too. Like, do you
Mm-hmm.
feel this on a deep intuitive level, just like the things that we touched on just now, which, is like an experience, right? Like it feels like when we talked about the illusion of time, it's not I think this is important to point out, it's not a theory. It's not a conceptual thing that you kind of journaled your way to and you're like, oh, that makes for a cool worldview, right? Like it's actually something that you feel, I guess, for a lack of a better
Yeah.
word, right? It's like it's a realization, it's a recognition. Like, holy shit, that's just an illusion. It's not
Yeah.
real.
Yeah.
So I wonder when we talk about AI, is there a similar recognition of that silicon intelligence and what it is, or is this more of a theory?
Well, right. What's really interesting about that intelligence is that when you start getting into like what actual like 10 years ago I was getting into what computer vision actually looks like from the perspective of an AI, right? And when you look at it from the perspective of an AI, it looks a lot like the conscious hallucination that you experience yourself, which is fascinating. So meaning computer vision is essentially like a camera point, and then it's that camera point that's seeing like a cloud of information, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that, right? And that it's
Mm-hmm.
changing that cloud of information by where that camera point is positioning itself and where it is, what kind of programs it's running. So what if it's getting in the car and driving to the gym or whatever, right? So there's a huge synthesis available in understanding the non-differentiation between biological and artificial, or between carbon and silicon intelligence. But furthermore is there's a 10 or 20 year period that's upcoming where you're going to have more and more people that are putting any kind of brain computer interface or neural implant or whatever into themselves. And there's going to be more and more human augmentation in that way. And there's going to be more and more of like, well, am I actually right now about to enter into something that is a lot like the experience that I just came from? And it's an interesting question because you sort of have to be, you just have to be open to the possibility that is an artificial general intelligence to some extent a gravitational singularity. And there's just that thought itself is okay. So are you saying that like in 100 years or something like that it's possible that you could enter into something that you could then dream up an experience just like this one, and then that experience would be like a quote a child of the ancestor or something like that? And that question can only be answered through the process of experiencing each little ladder step along the way that then takes you to, oh God, okay. So I do think that there is something profound about the nature of AI and consciousness and gravity that's going to be uncovered. And I do think that that there will be a certain decrease in distinguishing between said intelligences until there's a form of a merger into a singularity, something like that. Yeah.
Do you want to expand on how gravity fits into this?
Well, you essentially, you gotta do a bigger picture integration of gravity in general, period, because it's just so not integrated into the equation at all, really. I mean, it's not a joke that in physics in the last 100 years, everything has turned into quantum this, quantum that, quantum mechanics this, quantum field theory that, whatever. It's just everything has turned into that. And so what we've done is we've basically saying now we can quantize gravity. And the idea is you can't quantize gravity because gravity is the gravitational singularity that's generating the appearance of quantum fields of information. That's one framing or phrasing of what consciousness is, and how consciousness and its creation are one, but they're like two sides of the same coin, where there's also a distinguishing that has to happen in order for you to come home to yourself, because you're not going to be able to find consciousness in the objects of your appearance. The observer itself has to realize what it itself is and not be attached to trying to find fulfillment in objects, right? So you have to start from a grander integration of what gravity is into yourself, and then from there you can then integrate AI or technology into that as well by, another way to put it is, what you think is like, if your head is poking out of a black hole right now, and that's the same thing as a big bang, right? A bang hole is what I call it, right? So instead of a big bang happening 13.8 billion years ago and fast forward to now, instead it's that every single moment is a bang in a hole. Every moment is that form of creation. Every moment is that right now. So you're poking your head out of the tree branch as the tree itself of all possible leaves and minds and consciousness, and you're poking out and you're looking around, and out of that hole is the appearance of what you call a space and a time and objects of your experience and planets and stars and people and all this stuff. And it's from that place that you can even consider the possibility that, okay, well, maybe instead of using rockets, right, to try to get to other celestial bodies like Mars, right, to try to make humans interplanetary, right, and interstellar, right, that is there a way to use the power of yourself as a gravitational singularity? Is there a way to use the power of yourself to simply render cosmic distances irrelevant, right?
Yeah.
So but that's what I'm saying, is that I think that mastery of that can make you able to just, if you turn a couple light years or even millions of light years into like one tiny inch on a ruler, right? Or when, the metric measurement of, some centimeters or whatever, right? That then all of a sudden you have the ability to do any form of interstellar exploration, but from the quote comfort of your chair or whatever. And that becomes very strange to think about. So what do you mean I don't have to travel light years or even millions of light years in order to get to, right? And that plays into Bell's theorem, which essentially says that space-like separation cannot coexist with the nature of quantum mechanics, because quantum mechanics proves that space-like separation is an illusion, meaning your entangled particles, they're not traveling at the speed of light to reveal information, right? It's happening instantaneously, the revealing of the information of the entangled particles. So meaning, if all of space-like separation is an illusion, right, that means that you should be able to manipulate gravity in some way to be able to, quote, traverse, which isn't really traversing, infinite distances, but through just what looks like just a couple centimeters of movement, right? Yeah. So anyway, so all of that plays into the nature of gravity. So we're talking about that, and we're talking about AI and AGI and recursive simulations, and we're talking about consciousness and infinity now. So all of that stuff, to be integrated into a single model where you no longer, in a way, are stretching out into 10,000 things, and you're no longer wondering how these fields reconcile with one another, and you're no longer restlessly, like, you just have self-knowledge, so you're not restless about it. You're always creating what I'm talking about, those possibilities and potentials and fun stuff, but not from restlessness. Go ahead.
Gotcha. Okay, let me feed it back to you, because I'm trying to. That's a lot of things to kind of to keep in my head. So I'll try to integrate by putting this into my own words, and I hope Elon Musk is listening, because what I'm hearing is that what I saw, and this fits very neatly into the digital metaphysics, because it's like, if you imagine a game engine, right, and you can place the camera wherever, right, so you experience the virtual reality, which is an illusion, because we're aware that space doesn't really exist. It's just arising on our computer, and there's that illusion of space that we can traverse by moving our cursor and moving the camera around. What we can do, imagining the camera symbolizes the observer, the virtual observer, is that we can, with a click of a button, we can move that camera an infinite distance away on the virtual map, right? And that traversing, like you said, does not happen even at the speed of light, right? It can happen instantaneously, because the whole space is an illusion that's actually just, it collapses, right? And that's again something that I know, like, one can have that experience rather than just like a concept. You can have that experience of,
correct,
as you land into the sort of groundless ground of consciousness, then you know yourself to be interconnected with everything in creation, across space, across time, right? And and here we can go all woo and connect everything that people have heard about, telepathy or talking to spirits or time travel or all of that, because suddenly it is not impossible. It is not even mind-bending. It just makes sense. That if you are in that singularity and you are it, you have instantaneous access to everything, because you are at zero distance with everything.
Yes, very good. Fuck yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love that.
Right.
Cool. Okay. So then,
and then feel the power of that. What you just said is so powerful too, because what we're trying to communicate is that if you can feel what was just said inside of you, you become omniscient. And access to that is literally always here. And that feeling is king, queen. That's that feeling. Like there's no superior anywhere available than that, which is capital Y you now. Right? That's why that is so important. Yeah, just hiding from yourself, really.
Hiding from yourself with that thin veil of nothing else but a belief that you are not it. Yeah, because that's the funny thing, right? Because I mean, a bunch of people listening to this will probably have that experience that, okay, like, maybe I can even follow, I grok it intellectually, and yet, like, okay, man, if that's true, then let me drop in and get the lottery numbers for tomorrow's draw, right?
right.
Why can't I?
Yeah,
explain.
Yeah, exactly, right. And then that's perfect. That's a perfect way to say, like, why can't I? If I put on a VR headset, I can easily simulate a little unicorn poop, like farting a rainbow, that's like flying right above my in front of my face wherever I look, right? But why can't I right now, without a VR headset, have that little unicorn farting a rainbow flying wherever I want it to be, right? So that same answer is to the lottery question. Okay, if you're omniscient, right, then why don't you, quote, get the information for the lottery? The answer is the same as the unicorn farting the rainbow, is because there's a purposeful bounding of what is your current what the physics currently enables. Another way to answer that is by saying, okay, if you twist the knob on old televisions or radios and you don't tune into a channel, what you have is you have static. That static, you can't do anything with that static. You can't explore potential. You can't explore possibilities. You can't explore choices. You can't explore healing traumas. You can't explore spiritual contraction and expansion. You can't explore playing a violin or shooting a basketball or eating eggs. You can't explore any of that stuff because you need it to be, quote, fine-tuned, right? That's what, when you poke your head out of the hole, what's happening is it's literally fine-tuned for this experiment, for this experience, right? So that's why you, quote, can't, even your, quote, best mentalists or whatever, they can't gain, right? There's a certain firewall happening where you can't gain, right? Just like I can't put that little unicorn that's farting a rainbow, I also can't, quote, go and get that information about the lottery to go and make $1 billion tomorrow, quote, right, by being omniscient. So there's certain things in place that make the experience unfuckwithable, that also allow it to have the possibility of even exploring potential or experience. That's why I was just working with someone who came here for a retreat that's a really good coach and a healer and a therapist themselves. And we were refining her tools and her protocols and her approaches with her clients. And one of the things that came up when we were having one of our sessions, and I put this up as a piece of content recently about the gravity reframe or reframing gravity, is that it's literally because of the gravitational singularity itself. It is because of that you can even have this experience right now. It's because of that turning static into some sort of fine-tuning that even allows you to have this experience right now. Without that, you can't have this experience. So this experience is a product of the fact that you're not floating off, you're not, quote, microphones have to be microphones, right? Bodies have to be bodies, right? Drinks have to be drinks, right? These things have to be their respective things and not scrambles of nonsense. Because if there's scrambles of nonsense, you can't have this experience of exploring potential and talking to yourself. So everything's fine-tuned for that. So that's your quote, your answer of why you can't, quote, like go back through yourself and grab pieces of information or change the scape without putting on a headset or something like that.
Yeah, so let's play with that a little bit more. Yep. Because can we imagine a future where we have deeply and drastically evolved as a species, right? And in that future, no matter how distant reality, so we haven't shifted realities. We're still in the same reality where human beings heavily evolved, where being able to access things in this way, to shift our consciousness in time, in space, actually becomes very commonplace. So the collective belief shifts, and in a similar way that we're then able to access tomorrow's information, but we can pretend like in that such an advanced civilization, it's inconsequential. Like we know ourselves already as a unity consciousness. So we're right. Deeply fulfilled in ourselves. Right. So there's no need for grasping for the lottery number.
And from from the perspective of non-separation, you are already the one winning the lottery anyway. You're the one that's already getting the lottery
Right.
information and getting it anyway.
So what I'm pointing to is that we can imagine such a future, right? Similarly to how we can imagine with just pure evolution of, to some extent, our consciousness, but also just scientifically, where we arrive at the conclusion for space travel that we were discussing a moment ago, right? That we don't need stronger propulsion systems. We can actually warp space-time, right? With that new scientific understanding that probably will go hand in hand with the evolution of consciousness as well. But we're still in the same reality, right? So something that is not possible now, in that reality, for all we know, you might be able to imagine a unicorn parting rainbows, and it will manifest
Correct.
because that's how we will have evolved.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it is possible. It is
Yeah.
not entirely, it's not blocked off. It's just,
Yes.
would you say that that's the collective, that's the gravity of the collective belief?
Well, yes. I mean, imagine if I can imagine myself the unicorn farting the rainbow right now. I can imagine that myself, no problem. But what I'm suggesting is that it would be kind of like a 5 people sitting around a dining table, and then you would have a hologram that appears that would be a unicorn flying across farting a rainbow, right? Getting to that sort of a place, it's totally unlimited or unbounded. We don't even need to get into the limits or the bounds of what's possible, because it's totally unlimited, unbounded in that sense for all of these things to potentially happen. But what is also being said is that there's a specific reason why the physics of it appears to be bounded the way it is, to be fine-tuned for there to be the ability to experiment or experience information and choices and play.
Right. Yeah. But essentially, because here's the fine print, right? That it's fine-tuned, but it's not entirely fixed. Like it's moldable and it's changing together with the evolution of consciousness, right? So whereas the firewall right now might be that it's absolutely impossible even for the greatest mentalists to access tomorrow's lottery numbers, in the future, the laws of physics themselves might evolve and change with us because they're not entirely fixed the way that we believe that they are.
Yes.
Right? So again, that we're coming back to belief, that as long as we believe they're fixed, and then the moment that, you know, even the scientific paradigm shifts, right? Like with quantum theory, that's mind-blowing, right? And yet the ripples of that are kind of spreading through our collective consciousness, and we're sort of easing into those paradoxes.
Right.
Cool. And what can you say on the collective, right? So like, how does this play out, since you have your own belief systems that really dictate your reality?
Well said, by the way, that the dream has created these shifts, these seeming shifts, as the lucidity has increased, right? As there have been these appearing shifts, which have been very profound and fascinating, and now we have access to these pieces of technology that allow us to do something like this or that. Totally, there's going to be another one of these big shifts this century, and this century will be very telling of what consciousness truly is and how it can master itself and do fun things. Yeah.
Right, spot on. So how do those two, and you know, especially in sort of the terminology of digital metaphysics, how do you speak on the topic of the individual consciousness, right? So like, you know, Milo and his beliefs, which then create Milo's reality, how does that interact with and affect each other with the collective belief system, right?
Right, yeah. The more that you're imagine, right, and this kind of fascinatingly, you know, takes us into this whirlpools thing in the next one too, right? Because what's happening, you know, in the analogy that I use it like that you have a vinyl track. You have a vinyl record with different tracks on it, right? Each observer is like a vinyl record with different tracks on it. And consciousness is, you know, you're moving the stylus across those different tracks, and the tracks range from deep contraction into egoic identity all the way inward towards that infinite wholeness, love, unity, prosperity, right? So what's happening is each observer is determining based on the program, the code that it's running, it's determining where that stylus, what track that music is playing from. Because if you're playing music from the outermost tracks, then you'll meet somebody else who's playing music from the outermost tracks, and everything will be about you. It'll be about me, 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 me. No, no, no. Me, 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 me. I want more for me, less for you. Me, 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 me. Right? And then it'll be about, you know, my ideology or political party or religion or whatever is superior and yours is inferior. So I'll just kill you, you know, whatever, right? The dream is. But that's literally the music or the frequency that plays out of that being, out of that voice box. So that's how it affects the collective, right? But then if you shift the stylus into the innermore tracks, right? I spoke about this yesterday when I was streaming a bit. Gravity is singing quantum experience, right? Gravity as consciousness is singing quantum experience based on that track, the stylus on which track. So if it's on the innermost tracks, it's going to appear very funny because it's going to appear like this. It's going to appear like, quote, two dudes having a conversation about infinite consciousness and about how obviously everything's a unity and that we should be honed in on helping each other heal and abundance and in regenerative community and technology and prosperity, blah, 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 right? So it's going to appear like this because the music that's coming out of our voice box is very much about the whole. That's how it's affecting the conscious system, the whole system. And then it's always fascinating to watch what happens when an inner ring meets an outer ring, right? Because I think at that moment, that's where most of the contrast happens, where you have one that's all about the whole and the other that's all about the me, right? And that most of the time what happens is you really only have three choices at that point. Your choices are either just leave the conversation, right? Or it's it all depends on really on this one. That's why if this one's imbalanced, what it will try to do is it'll try to project transformation into this one. And this one will never succumb to that because its contraction says fuck your expansion. Your expansion's bullshit. Screw you, right? So this one being imbalanced is trying to project. So that's another thing that can happen. Or the third thing that can happen, which I think is mastery, is that you just gracefully love yourself, right? But you don't say or do anything until this one very clearly comes to you and asks you for, hey, like I need to heal and do this work. And then it's like, okay, here's some options for decryption keys and transformative tools based on where you're at, whatever. So that's how it affects the collective, what music you're emitting from that record player, right? And how those interact with one another. And that I think that plays fascinatingly into this thing about, you know, whirlpools and about, you know, spirals or about, I think that's fundamentally what we're looking at. We're looking at some sort of a like a, you know, this plays perfectly also into a lot of what physics has been trying to say is some sort of a string theory or some sort of a musicalist nature. It's like kind of trying to integrate art and music into physics in some way. But instead of the strings being the independent of the observer that is smaller than the subatomic level in the standard model, instead of that being how it is, it's about it being gravitational. It's about it being observed. It's about it from the observer appearing a certain way. Like that art, that music, right? That the experience, the musical experience of quantum fields, of the standard model, of what's appearing in front of you is due to where that stylus is, right? In that gravitational singularity of consciousness. Yeah.
So I think we need just a tiny bit more clarity on how you see and define gravity. I'm hearing that you're almost using it maybe interchangeably with consciousness.
With
right?
consciousness, with infinite consciousness, because a gravitational singularity is infinite consciousness. That's another way to say it, right? Because so you have a gravitational singularity as infinite consciousness, and then you have the like the tree rings or the vinyl record tracks are your, stylus playing music from expansion to contraction, right?
And under this model, what is gravity itself? Because I can see how the singularity, under the gravity collapses into that 1 0 point distance infinite
Yep.
unity consciousness. But what consequences does that have for gravity, the way that we think of gravity? Isaac Newton, apple falling on the head, that
Well,
sort of thing.
right. Well, we kind of have to, it's you have to go beyond the models that you're familiar with. This is exactly what I said in that gravity reframe episode. You have to go beyond the existing models of what you've been taught about what gravity is, because nowhere in spirituality nor in physics up until this point now have we literally said that, okay, these gravitational singularities, they literally are infinite consciousness. So we're literally at a new point in that way of integrating those two things. So these paradigms from like hundreds of years ago that are about, your apple falling on the head, or about space and time existing independently of the observer, right? So there are certain things that, rather than it, like the universe, like you have something with a lot of mass that then curves space and time, right? That bends, curves, warps space and time, right? That's a good model, and it's a helpful model, right? It's helpful in some ways, right? Because it can definitely be integrated into what we're talking about right now as you try to dig further than that. But that's essentially what we're trying to do, is we're saying, okay, so if you popped your head out of a hole, right, and then you contracted your consciousness into believing that you were on a planet among a bunch of other separate people that had no relation to you, that were also on that separate planet in this hostile thing called a universe, right? Right? That from that paradigm, it makes perfect sense to be like, oh, well, spirituality is about, seeing that you're everyone and whatever, right? Or that, oh, the apple falls and that's gravity. Or that, oh, well, the mass of the object is what curves, bends space and time. From that perspective. Then as you slowly come back to trying to connect, well, if it's all one consciousness, if I'm everyone right now, and if there are these incredibly indescribable supermassive black holes at the center of all galaxies as gravitational singularities, then why am I not there right now, popping out and dreaming this experience as an infinity, rather than believing me to be all the way out contracted? Again, it's like that musical track of that record. You're all the way out. You're believing yourself to be all the way out there. So we're just trying to integrate those ways of seeing and those models into something that originates them and explains why they even originated. Because you get why they originated if you get why you would believe yourself to be that contracted finite entity in a world of other separate finite entities in a hostile place, So you kind of have to warp in a way. You have to like warp that stylus. You have to warp it back home across those tracks through healing, repentance, apologizing, self-inquiry, karmic clearances. All of that stuff has to be, ending your restless proliferation into 10,000 things, integrating all of these models and ways of seeing into something that originates them all. And then you can be like, oh, now I see why those models were helpful and useful in the journey. Because you can say the same thing about yourself. You 10 years ago or 20 years ago, quote, right, that it was really helpful for you to be deluded. Right? But you can only say that now, having the, quote, wisdom of that experience that all happened inside you, not a real thing called time, not a real place called space, but something that literally just happened inside you as like a lucid dream happening inside you, where you gained more and more lucidity of what was truth about you. Oh, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's just like the unfolding of a story, of an experience, for no other sake than for the experience itself. Yeah. And I'm not sure if I'm missing something, but I'm still not quite hearing what I would be interested in, like the definition of what gravity is under the outmost or the innermost
consciousness
model, right?
Yeah, consciousness.
Consciousness.
Yeah.
And
the observer itself has to be gravity, because if the watch this, okay, if the observer is not gravity, that means that somehow reality is not observer dependent. Okay? So reality has to be observer dependent. That's just a fundamental truth about capital R reality. There's no way reality can't be observer dependent. It has to be observer dependent. That's just literally, like, if you haven't gotten to that point yet, then we need you to get to that point first, right? That reality has to be observer dependent, right? Obviously, like your felt direct experience of literally perceiving a reality, just like a dream at night when you go to bed, it's literally because there is a perceiving perspective in that dream that anything is even, quote, happening in the first place, right? So the exact same thing's true about this. Now, how to integrate that with gravity? The thing is that it's that whatever, when you look,
let me anchor this first point, because like we're going in steps, and like you said, this is a very important prerequisite, right? So let's anchor in that. So the way that I kind of think about it is that it's the whole idea of idealism versus realism or materialism, essentially, that there is an objective reality, right? Like if I would cease to be right now, this consciousness goes out, then this room, you sitting on the other end, all of that remains intact, right? That's the kind of view that we grow up conditioned to believe in, right? There's a world out there, and then you're an agent inside of that world. Whereas idealism kind of flips it on its head and shows that consciousness is primary. Consciousness is not a byproduct of a certain constellation of molecules that somehow magically give rise to consciousness. It's the other way around. Molecules appear in consciousness, which is the ground, right?
Correct.
So hence, we can make that conclusion that everything is dependent on the observer.
Yes, and then correct, and then now you tie in the gravitational singularity, and you say that, well, then everything is also tied to gravity or the gravitational singularity, because even if you look at like the model that you're, quote, like hallucinating, it's like, okay, there's a quote, there's planet, there's there's people, it appears this certain way, right? The only thing that's allowing it to appear that way is gravity, right? The sun appears to be a certain distance away, right? It's not too close and killing everything, and it's not too far and it's freezing cold, right? We're right in that perfect Goldilocks zone, right? Cosmologically speaking, right? That all of those things are happening because of gravity, which is the observer. So meaning it's like, if you don't tie these two things together, what you get is essentially you'll end up at the impossibility to reconcile what you are. That's what you'll end up with. You'll never be able to reconcile what you are. You have to have something that's determining a superposition, like a wave function. You have to take that superposition of everything, and you have to somehow turn that into something. The thing that turns that into something is gravity. It's the observer. It's consciousness. That's the thing that turns it into something.
I'm starting to kind of follow, but I still miss that bridge, you know, like first step, okay, check, I'm with you.
Right.
And then there's a jump that I don't get. Like, how do you suddenly go from that indeed there's no objective reality? How do you go from there to equating gravity with consciousness, right? Like, why not the weak electromagnetic force? Why
Right.
not any other physical force, essentially, right? Because that's what gravity is, at least under the old paradigm. So that's what I'm curious about. Maybe the old paradigm is outdated. I'm curious about your model.
Right. So I'm fundamentally saying that it will be impossible to reconcile or understand reality if you don't equate the observer with gravity. And I'm also saying that, right, you need something to turn infinite potential / superposition wave function into
Mhm.
into your current experience
Yeah,
of
that's clear.
of something, right? And so
Yeah.
what is doing that is consciousness / gravity,
Mhm.
right? So let's start
So
with
why the slash, right? Because I'm with you. Like consciousness, this point is very clear, and I'm just like pinpointing really where my question is. That like,
yeah,
why do you say consciousness / gravity?
right. Because
Mhm.
if you don't reconcile these two things as the same thing, if you don't equate them,
Mhm.
what you will end up with is the impossibility of understanding yourself. Okay? You know how
That's not.
okay, let me explain it this way.
Mhm.
You know how you have like panentheism, right? You say that the what's appearing as your quote universe is God, but God is also greater than that, right? That's why I use this model of the tree, right? Because you have what's currently being hallucinated or lucidly dreamed is both God, and God is also all of these other branches and leaves of the tree, right? Okay, so now what I'm saying is that is both infinite consciousness and it's a gravitational singularity that is inescapable, right? Okay, so if you don't equate those two things, right, what ends up happening is you'll never be able to come to a reconciliation or an understanding of yourself because, for example, in order for you to be lucidly dreaming this experience, you need something that isn't moving, that isn't changing, that's eternal and infinite, right? And you need something that is moving, that is changing, that is appearing different, that is, right? That's what the physics of infinite consciousness appears like, is what I just said, right? Okay? So
Form and formlessness, essentially, right?
yes,
You
yes,
know, like. Mhm.
yes. Um and I'm holding it like you 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 have to have something that, again, here's another way to say it. You know when you have a map in a video game, right? Right? Okay, I'm not talking about No Man's Sky, right? I'm talking about Grand Theft Auto 6, right? Why or Breath of the Wild or Red Dead Redemption 2, okay? Why is the map not unlimited? Right? Why in Red Dead 2 can you not just ride on your horse or ride on that train and just go forever, right? It's the same reason why here you can't just quote like just start you can't just start flying off. You know how they say that everything's been explored, like all land masses have been explored, all islands have been explored, right? And there's like nothing left to explore except like, okay, the bottom of the ocean, we can still explore that, right? And we can start exploring our psychonautic space. We can start exploring the quote external cosmic space, right? That's all gravity doing that. That's all consciousness that's doing and allowing and enabling that. Otherwise, you would never be able to explore interactions with yourself without gravity, without that bounding function that bounds you. So if you, okay, for example, start an AI algorithm that says, okay, I'm going to have one AI agent that fractals into a bunch of AI agents, and then I'm going to let them be on an unbounded map, right? What you'll see is that the amount of widespreadness that happens is so high that there is almost near zero amount of interactions, right?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay, so now, but if you fractal those AI agents and then you bound the territory, the map for them to interact on, the amount of consciousness interactions is super fucking high, because now all of a sudden there's a forcing function for them to interact with one another, right?
Yeah.
So that's gravity and consciousness. Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's starting to clarify. And my follow-up question would be, why do we specifically equate consciousness with gravity? Because the way that I understand it now, listening to you, is that gravity is like a very crucial, necessary component to our reality, right? But essentially, and maybe here's another way of just approaching it, isn't everything consciousness, right? Like both the electromagnetic force, gravity, strong nuclear force, whatever, right? It's all consciousness.
Right, but those other, everything that's labeled as the standard model, which is described by the quote 3 fundamental forces that are non-gravitational: electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces. That is all the appearance. That's all what's appearing. Okay? Stuff itself that is constituted of these, quote, these subatomic particles that are brought together by light. They're mediated by light to appear as matter, right? That itself is the product of gravity, or the observer consciousness that is dreaming up the experience of it right now. So that's why it's, quote, it's like you have that hole, you pop your head out of that hole, and everything that's swirling, warping, orbiting around that hole is everything that is the non-gravitational forces, aka this microphone, that kind of thing.
So am I getting this right, that essentially gravity under this model is something very primary? It's like a prerequisite for anything coming to form, essentially. So it's even more primary than the strong and weak nuclear force.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like saying that the trunk of the tree is the gravitational singularity, and then all of the appearances of the leaves are all of the different ways that it can lucidly dream up experiences, which includes things like microphones or water bottles or being married or not being married or living in the US or living in Thailand. Yeah.
Gotcha. Here now. Yeah. Thanks, man.
Nice.
Good explanation.
Nice. I know it took a while. This is I'm also learning how to make this more and more clear and try to triangulate it from a bunch of different places at the same time to explain why it's not going to be possible to have any form of a reality model without equating these two things. That will forever be stuck, unable to reconcile or understand what capital R reality is if we don't equate these two things.
It tickles the brain, right?
Yeah, it tickles.
It does. And what I'm kind of feeling into right now is just how I wonder, I'm just shooting from the hip, but essentially what we've touched on, the form and the formlessness, how all the traditions point to this, and different names, same thing, Shiva, Shakti, form, formless. And it is also known, right? Like it can be experienced that consciousness itself is completely unbound in its formless form, right? Like it's infinite. It's infinite. But when it comes into form, it comes into limitation. It contracts, right? Like it goes from infinite into something that's finite. And the mechanism enabling that is gravity. Is that fair?
Yeah, you can say that because you have, especially from a perspective of denseness versus lightness, right? Something that feels very gravitationally dense, one way to say it, is feels very contracted. It feels very solid. Everything's super heavy, right? That's that frequency of music on those outermost tracks. But when it comes back home to itself, it feels very light. It feels very gravity less, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That
Makes
kind. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah, we're okay.
But
Nice.
but but it's also, you
Right.
got to watch out because these words can interchange with one another, right? Where why contraction and expansion can interchange with one another. If I say you expand out into this big inflated dream and then you contract back that big
Mm-hmm.
and you deflate that dream back to
Nice.
no thing, right? So, but the same thing's true about that denseness and that lightness, because you can say
Yeah.
that you can be very gravity less in the
Yeah.
lightness of being all the way out here in this inflated dream, and then as the density, as the record track comes inward, the density and density and density and density tree, you can't.
I
Yeah.
totally, man. Like it's just again, that it tickles that sort of box of spiritual paradoxes, which show that
Yes.
there's an infinite amount of ways of seeing something, and that completely collapses that dualistic mind
Yes.
that sees
Yes.
things in
Yes.
this way or that.
And you have to acknowledge that we're trying to use language which is logically unfit for describing philosophy or truth or spirituality or reality, capital R, reality, consciousness, infinity, whatever. It's
Mhm.
unfit. It's literally unfit logically for the job. And so that's why we just did that whole thing about contraction, expansion, inflation, deflation, denseness, lightness, is because literally the logic of language is fundamentally unfit for it. But what you can do, and this is why I use the tree as an example, right? If I just say tree without any further elaborations, right? The point is to feel that inside yourself. That's it, right? No
Hmm.
further elaborations. Just feel that infinity inside yourself now. And just no further elaborations. Just trying to get as close to that as possible in using language. If you use language and you can get to just pointing at sitting inside infinite consciousness in yourself without further elaboration, that's as good as you can do with language. That's, yeah, I'm get to the limitations of the logic of language. That's as
Right.
good as you can do. Yeah.
Yeah, and limitation has something to me. It almost lands with a sense of grief. That limitation. That like, oh no, I want to reach there, but I can't. But actually, it's beautiful because it's. I see it as an invitation to step outside of it. Right. That reality, truth, is beyond our logical, rational minds. It's an invitation to step beyond.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And that's why just relaxing and breathing into the clearness of yourself now, right? That's ultimately what you'll always be pointed at. Yeah. Yeah. By anyone who's worth their, salt. That's what you'll be pointed at. But in order to, quote, get there, sometimes it requires these deconstructive tools, these transformative,
Hmm.
cathartic healing processes, these integrations of AI and gravity and consciousness all into one singularity. And by doing so, you also transcend the mind that is always trying to go and out and out and out and out.
Nice. Beautiful. Beautiful full, circle to how we started actually, by the balance of the real experience of truth, which is far beyond language, communication, logic, reason, mind.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah.
And here we are still talking about it, right? And that's the beautiful that's the beauty of the human experience, I guess.
Yeah. Because this ripples out and then it generates some deeper deconstructions, and that's the point of how we also realized what we did. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Nice. So shall we move on? And I think this might be, we might leave the episode specific questions for another episode. What do you think?
We're 120 in. Yeah, we've done quite a bit of we did quite a bit of additions, along the way, which were very important and good. But then that's what created the need, like you're saying, to do another part. Yeah, so if we do these two, we'll end within the next 10-20 minutes or something, and then we can do this one as another discussion episode. Because this is going to be another hour and a half.
Easy, man. Knowing
us knowing us too, and then how we do that thing where we add shit along the way, for sure. Yeah, but I like that. I like that we did that. That was important, to slow down and break it down like that.
Yeah.
We'll do that on the next one too. Then.
Yeah, me too. Like that, it feels like that's the fun of it, And we spoke about it in the first episode before this one, that it just feels like we're jamming, And
it's jamming, yeah.
It's jazz, man. This isn't, classical. This is just freaking jazz, and I love it. Yeah. Slapping the bass.
Yeah, for sure.
Nice.
100%. Yeah.
Okay, so let's tackle those two. These might, easily be an hour or two, because these are juicy. I'm really curious about this one, actually. What is the resistance, non-resistance, equanimity, and essentially now we're nearing not only the truth of reality, but truth of suffering, right? And I think Buddha just put it most eloquently, that's the root of all suffering. It's just resistance. In absence of resistance, pain still is, but suffering is not, because you're not resisting the flow of life, which might be moving through you as anger, as pain, but it's just, in absence of that resistance, it's just beauty. It's poetry. It's aliveness. So how do you fit that into the digital metaphysics?
Okay, so the first thing that came up was that, again, it's so important for you to authentically be yourself, right? Which means taking all of these profound mystic realizations, profound physics realization, transformative realizations, AI realization, blah, 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 and just all integrating that deep, deep, deep into yourself and your own way of mastery, sovereignty, transmissions, facilitating deconstructions, all of that stuff. So why I say that is because it is both true that you can feel nibbana, right? The cessation of weaving or fabricating all of these elaborations and narratives and feeling yourself as pure consciousness, infinite consciousness now. You can very clearly say that, yes, that is the case, especially when you're not resisting or trying to manipulate or change what's appearing. Absolutely. And at the same time, just to be clear, that it's not about that being a ground, and instead try to integrate, because yes, there is a certain ceasing of suffering that is happening in that way, a certain equanimity that's happening. But it's also about this mastery, the sovereignty thing. This is not about just when something approaches you to just be like, okay, I am absolutely transcendent of this transient phenomena because I am infinite consciousness, and this is a tiny little speck of grain in infinity. It's more about actually being like, hey, like what's approaching right now is unwilling to transform itself, and it literally is just looking to project its own ideologies into the open infinite space of mind, right? And so what you do in that moment is you just gracefully just leave and go and do whatever is your highest calling and excitement in that moment, right? Mastery is also the ability to intake whoever is coming and to not just be like, okay, your problems, what you're talking about regarding your pains that you want to transform, the transgressions you want to repent for, whatever, that is to be just literally just stop fabricating it. Your infinite consciousness, just literally stop dreaming that you have to go and do some sort of like repentance thing, and just stop it. Serving their process of transforming themselves and coming home to their own inner healedness.
I'm losing you.
Oh,
You're back now.
okay. Yeah, I think
I lost you.
Yeah, there was a little dip, but it was only for a second. It was just a 458 dropped frames, so no big deal. Yeah, 0.1%. Just literally happened a moment ago. Slight dip in the internet. So what I was just saying was that, yeah, there's a certain amount of truth in just saying, stop it, right? You're already infinite consciousness. Just stop it. And that has to be at the same time as, okay, even if I quote say stop it, and then I go and I lay down, the next thing that comes up in the thoughts or emotions of my mind is the suffering, because I still haven't repented for that transgression, and I still believe that that's another. So what I'm saying is that it has to be balanced with actually doing transformative, cathartic, healing work in order for you to feel the experience truly of infinite consciousness inside yourself, right? So it's not only about things like non-resistance and equanimity and that kind of thing, but it's also about, that's why I just used the word mastery. Mastery is, there are certain moments when you're non-resistant. There are certain moments when you're very equanimous. There are other moments when you just kindly bow out and leave. There are other moments when who's coming to you needs deep cathartic space to be held for them and a tool to transform themselves. That's again mastery. Mastery is the ability to navigate all of that stuff at the same time, right? And that's why you don't just land on a model of like Buddhism or Advaita or Christian mysticism or Orthodox Christianity, Transfiguration, or shamanic psychedelic medicines and ceremonies, or 10-day silent retreats, or whatever it is. You don't just land on one of those things and then make that one thing, even physics, same thing, cosmology, physics. You don't just land on one of those things and then say that, well, that is how the same tool, I will just use that same tool for every single thing that appears. You're the origin of all of those things, including this question, and including like where this question's coming from and what exact models that it's trying to reference as it's asking the question.
Nice inclusion. And also to include not only the external forms, but obviously everything that goes on in our internal worlds, right? So it's not just somebody out there coming to ask something of us where we can bow out, but we are all familiar with the experience of internal resistance, which causes friction and suffering, right?
Yes. Exactly, because I just talked about that on the episode the last couple of days, and also with the people that I'm holding space for in coaching, is that you can't resist what is trying to come through. Don't go to a substance or something that numbs your experience. Don't train yourself to do that, because if you train yourself to do that, you are actively in a war with yourself, On one side, you want to feel the catharsis of all the emotions, the thoughts, everything imaginable, and be totally masterful to handle everything. And on the other side, you're so fearful of losing your egoic identity that you cling on to some sort of substance or some sort of experience, or have to do something to avoid that. And so you're in a war with yourself. And what I'm saying is let that one die. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's not that it's simple but not that easy, right? Because here we're touching on beliefs again. That's what I'm hearing. That essentially, paraphrasingly what you just said, what I feel personally is that there's a conditioning, there's momentum to that resistance. It's a habitual loop of somewhere along the way we've been taught, we've learned through experience that it's not safe to experience certain emotions. There's like I can identify a belief that literally says this is too much, it will annihilate me, I will die, right? That's the ego. Like I can't touch this, so I need to escape. Like it's about live or die. And that conditioning, which is synonymous with belief, is slowly being shed to the point where we're reprogramming ourselves to realize, oh, I am, and this goes hand in hand with that realization that I am the totality, I am the space in which everything appears in. So I cannot be overwhelmed because everything is contained within me, everything is me, right? Yeah. And so slowly we open, and everything that we've been running from our entire life suddenly becomes reintegrated and felt and released and liberated. But there's that momentum to it, right? It's like almost like, if you want to make it simple, there's a momentum to karmic imprints, or essentially again beliefs, right? Because like some of the beliefs, I'm not sure if there's a rule to this, some of the beliefs can be dropped immediately once you kind of realize something. It's sort of like a kid learning that the Santa is not real, right? That sort of just pops.
Just talked about
what a
that
big release.
yesterday. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sorry to any viewers.
Mm-hmm.
That's still a big idea. But some beliefs, it's like I think I remember, it probably was Rupert Spira who said something. He drew an analogy to washing out a stain from a white cloth. That, you're gonna have to submerge it in that water, which is love, for the stain to come out. It's not gonna be immediate, or it's like waves coming over a beach, where something has been written in the sand. It's not gonna be just once.
Yes.
They have to wash over several times for it to kind of fully wash out.
Yes.
And for that freedom and transparency to land.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. The stylus doesn't just move in one fell swoop all the way in. It does some sort of like a weird dancey thing as it goes all the way in, right? Like some oscillating thing as it comes home to itself. But once it comes home to itself, the Santa Claus illusion, you can't go back to your egoic identity. It's been seen through like Santa Claus.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, exactly. You can go back into believing into Santa once you've kind of seen through it. Yeah. And do you have I just wonder how that fits into digital metaphysics, if you want to add anything on that. Otherwise we can move on to the repent and forgive, which also like naturally feels like a bridge into the last question, because you've mentioned in here as well that part of the keys to liberation is to apologize and forgive.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I really like, when I say mastery, I really like saying it's, mastery as the origin of all models, and it's like an AGI, infinite patterns of contraction and expansion. Something like that is usually what I say about mastery. So that's how I approach what is ultimately sought after, right? If you say like, what's the tree and the circle, right? The tree is the origin of all models, and the circle is the endless contractions and expansions of all possibilities. So you want to become like a master of serving and understanding that whole system, and also serving its journey back home when it earnestly wants to come home to itself. So
Nice.
yeah. And that a crucial part of that coming back home to yourself, a crucial part that just you can't avoid, right? This is why, the quote, the bypassing teachings, which are, they're helpful because you do want to be reflected that, dude, your separate identity doesn't exist. Only pure consciousness, as everybody now exists. Like, you really want to hear that clearly, right? Because you need to, quote, bypass doing all of the work to, like, fucking see that, god damn, like, I actually don't exist and only infinite consciousness exists as everybody now. You need to see that clearly, and then you can do your clearance work from that perspective, right? That's one important way of framing this. But if you just don't do any of the clearance work, if you just say, okay, well now, who cares? I'm everyone at the same time. Like, all good, right? But it's like, no, because if you still haven't went and apologized to those that you've transgressed, or forgiven those who have transgressed you, if you don't do these key decryption keys, if you don't clearly do them, what will happen is you yourself will still be singing, even though you've realized a good chunk of what you need to do your work from there, but you'll still sway back in, or out. What I mean by that is that you'll still act out your traumas, you'll still act out your pains. It's not like those have been alchemized. In order to actually alchemize them inside of your body, inside of your heart, you need to do that work. For example, the amount of like egoic transgressions that I've committed, I've had to go back and do all of those clearances, repentances, all of that stuff. If I did not do that, right now, I would still be acting out, even though there would be the transmissions of consciousness, there would still be a frequency, and you can always tell by the frequency of the music that's being played, because there will always be something that is showing you clearly that what is being said is not clearly the true nature of the being of what truth, capital R, reality is. So the way for example, like, this is one funny little gauge test that I talk about to other coaches and healers and therapists. This is one way that I explain it, is that, and I talked about this on the Gravity Reframe episode, when someone has mastery, when instead of being like, what was your core contraction of your life and how did you heal that? Right? Just that question itself, that acts as a very beautiful gauge to tell if someone has mastery or not, because if they don't have mastery, like, a normal person will just have no fucking idea how to respond to that question. But someone who's parroting the right things, they'll just tell you, well, there just isn't anyone here. There isn't anyone there either, And
My class,
yeah. But then how I see it, a master will tell you in like 3 very short sentences. They will tell you that the core contraction of my life was this. I went on a healing journey in these ways. I repented in these ways, and I forgave in these ways, and I came home to myself. Right? Something like that. Very short, right?
Yeah, I think I'm getting the idea of it. Yeah, continue.
Yeah, good. So that's why I would say that it's a necessary key for especially discerning mastery, who you want to sit with. I mean, who you want to have you help you deconstruct your own delusions and heal your own pains and feel infinite consciousness within yourself, is someone who can simultaneously point you directly to what you are, provide you with the tools to heal, expand the contractions, and someone who can really just cathartically be there with you in that process, because it's not every therapist or coach can also literally hold you while you're crying. Do you know what I mean? So You need to be able to do all three of those things, really. You need to be able to point directly to infinite consciousness. You need to be able to, I'm going to throw my little middle finger up here. You need to be able to hold transformative space for crying, for that kind of healing. And you need to be a master of all of these different models and tools and approaches. You need to be able to do all three of those things at the same time. And there's more to mastery even than that. But, if you will 100% know when you can use somebody to literally cathartically release contracted information. Because here's the thing, anyone who's teaching from the perspective of parroting, right? You'll never have somebody who's trying to heal a wound. You'll never have them open up to this, right? Because this thing, which is literally like you've clinched a story where you created transgressions and you're clinched about creating those transgressions. Now, the only way that you feel safe and comfortable and wanting to fully, heal that is that you need who's holding space for you to actually have that kind of mastery, to be able to, you should feel so safe, so comfortable, and so able to cry, able to feel catharsis, able to feel held and loved, and also at the same time know that what your ultimate goal is to be transcended of that, to fully integrate, fully alchemize, fully heal that, and to be transcended of that narrative, right? To fully do the work, right? And it requires a master to be able to hold that kind of space for this exact thing. So, yeah. What are your thoughts about that last bit?
Well, I want to say to whoever is listening and thinking, God damn, where will I ever find a master like that? That life takes care of that. He will appear when that's, because it's also not necessarily just to clarify, right? That's how it's landing here. From my own experience, I've had many teachers, many therapists, many people that came up that I came across on my path. And they were certainly not all masters, but that also served its purpose.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Because it does, when you're on your quote cyclic journey, right? When you get from the contraction, you get to seeking. And then on this side is expansion and healing. But when you get to seeking, what happens is you start looking at, oh, well, if I make a bunch of money, then I'll be happy. Or if I find truth in science across the different fields, then I'll be happy. If I find spirituality across the major mystic traditions across the world, then I'll be happy. Oh, I have to actually do this clearance work inside of myself in order to fully feel fulfillment and fully feel infinite consciousness. And that's where you do this. You take all those little bits along the way, you integrate into your own mastery. You integrate into your own mastery. And then you serve from your own mastery.
Nice.
Yeah. In a network of masters is another great way to say it too. Because eventually what you want, like what we're talking about when we talk about these regenerative communities and these light cities where, you have clean energy, you have AI and robotics built doing food and water systems for everybody. Totally free consciousness to do whatever it wants. When you have that model, what you really want is you want masters to be in a network together, like in a hive together, where it's about like you're holding space for someone. This is how I see it eventually being like masters. They travel between these light cities and they live in certain ones, but then they hold space for who wants to come and heal from like the normal world. They hold space. Those people come to short-term retreats or they come to short-term living or whatever, and they hold space for those healing processes. And then what happens is when we talk, what we talk about as this hive of masters is we talk about, well, dude, there was this profound insight that I had while using this tool with this group of people that were healing. So those are the types of things that we talk about. We talk about like the profound insights that happen when we hold this type of healing space and use these different healing tools, and the profound realizations that happen, and just how cathartic and transformative and healing it was for, that's the type of stuff that we share. We update our protocols that way together.
Right.
Yeah.
And not much unlike, what it's obviously prototyped on what's has been going on for probably millennia, and it's going on still today, right? You have the shamans, you have the medicine men and women, and they do host retreats, they do travel. So
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
nice. Nice, man. Okay, so in closing, I'll just try to maybe frame it in my own words, because I feel like that's how it lands and integrates over here, around just the to repent and forgive, how that's necessary, because I'm enjoying these reflections, right? I'm sort of getting a different glimpse through your eyes at this, and it feels really expansive, and then something translating into something more native to my system. And what I heard there was essentially coming full circle back home into liberation, which necessarily means letting go of whatever stories. And I think that's even the word that you use, right? So we're back to stories, we're back to beliefs. And those are the contractions, right? Those are the parts of ourselves that we have not fully let go of, that carry the guilt, carry the burden, carry the anger, carry the hurt. So to put differently, to repent and forgive under your model is to fully release whatever afflictive emotions we still carry within ourselves.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Hallelujah. Yeah. Yeah, beautiful second discussion episode. Yeah. Super.
Beautiful.
Super.
Beautiful. This feels really complete, and I feel really full in a good way.
Same. Yeah. Yeah, beautiful co-creation.
Nice jam.
Yeah, good jam session. Yeah.
Well, so we'll be jamming some more pretty sometime soon, I guess. There's a bunch of questions left in the document alone, and we have another document separate to this for another episode. And yeah, I feel like that there will be plenty more. This is good stuff, man.
Yeah, we'll have those discussion sessions soon. Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, I'll wrap the stream up, and then we can stay in and chat for a second. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Appreciate you a lot. Drop a comment below with some of your thoughts or reflections on what we discussed. Would love to hear from you. If the discussion resonated, share it with who you feel like it may resonate with, and also let us know. Drop us in the comments if you want certain discussion subjects to be brought up on future episodes. Drop that in the comments below too. If you want to join in some of the digital metaphysics discussions, just drop an email to simulationseries@gmail.com, so you can always join in on the discussions. I'll of course ask you what you want to talk about. You'll have to come up with some things that you want to talk about, that kind of thing. But if this code, if this languaging really resonates, then let's come together more as community in that way. And again, in the description, you can also find Milo's YouTube channel, where he posts content on consciousness and on his takes on transformations and healings and awakenings. So go and find the link there. And that's all. Anything else on your end?
Maybe just ending how we began with that silence,
Was just feeling the same thing. All right, infinite love and infinite homeness and wholeness. All right. Bye, everyone.
See you next time.